Okay, exercise 612 asks us to compare a income statement under variable costing and absorption costing, and it asks us to compute unit price. Well, 1A says compute the unit price under variable costing for year 1 and year 2. Well, they're exactly the same. There's no change. And keep in mind that the selling and admin costs are never added in, whether they're fixed or variable. They are never added in, okay? So we know that the cost per unit each year is $36. So let's go on and do our income statement, take a look and see how it changes a little bit, okay? So there's our income statement for year 1 and year 2. We'll come down year 1 first, just a little easier that way. Our sales are $2 million, okay? And we're given that because they tell us that they sold 40,000 units, okay? So in year 1 they sold 40,000, and in year 2 they sold 50,000. In year 1 they made 50,000, and in year 2 they made 40. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind, okay? In year 1 they produced 50,000 units and sold 40. During the second year they produced 40 and sold 50. So the inventories are going to change. We have to pay attention to that under absorption costing. Under variable costing, you'll see it doesn't really matter. Okay, so the sales, we sold 40,000 units at $50 per unit, and that's from the information. We sold 40,000 units at $50 per. We have $36 of costs per unit that we figured out, and $3 variable selling per unit, okay? So when we multiply that by 40,000, we come up with 1,440,000 and 120,000. So our total variable expenses under variable costing is $1,560,000. That gives us a contribution margin of $440,000. From that, we take our fixed manufacturing overhead, our fixed selling and admin, and we end up with an operating income for year 1 of $160,000 under variable costing. Okay, now let's take a look at year 2. Now remember, year 2 we sold 50,000 units but only made 40. So this number is 50,000 times 50. So that's $50 per unit times 50,000 units. That's where that number comes from. The costs are 50,000 units times 36 and 50,000 units times 3. That's where they come from. Our total variable expenses for this year are $1,950,000, giving us a contribution margin of $550,000. Fixed expenses remain the same, so our net operating income under variable costing is $270,000. Now the problem says, well, just suppose for the hell of it that these folks don't want to go to jail, so they decide to produce their income statement using absorption costing, the legal one, okay? Well, things change a little bit, other than the fact that we're not going to go to jail and spend 8 years in a small cell with somebody named Bubba the Butt Buster, okay? Here's how they look a little different. Let me shrink my image a little bit. There we go. Okay. First, let's take a look at the unit costs because they're a little different, because we have more fixed manufacturing overhead in the first year, because while the fixed manufacturing overhead remained the same, when we divided it by 50,000, our production the first year, it was $4 a unit. And that's the 50,000, or the 200,000, excuse me, divided by 50,000. Okay? That's how we came up with that. Right here. Second year, a little different. We made 40,000 units. We still had the same amount of overhead, so the overhead per unit is more. That therefore impacts the total cost of the unit, the absorption cost of the product. For year one, it's $40. For year two, it's $41. Well, let's do the math. Sales is 50,000 times, or 40,000 times 50 units. That's how we got that number, 40,000 times 50 units. That gave us that. And this year, the second year, we have 50,000 times $50 per unit. And that gives us our sales. Now, you have to be careful here with the cost of goods sold. In year one, it's 40,000 units times $40 per unit. Okay? That gives us a cost of goods sold of $1,600,000. Year two, the cost of goods has changed because now we have 40,000 units, the number of units sold, okay, times 41 unit plus 10,000 units at $40 per unit. That's the trick. That's what you have to catch. Because remember, we only made 40,000 units this year. So we have to include the 40,000 we made this year plus the 10,000 we made last year, and we have to include those at the correct price. So that's how we get that number. Okay, it's 40,000 at 41 because we only made 40,000 this year, plus the 10,000 we had from beginning inventory. And the rest is pretty straightforward. You have the gross margin minus the selling and administrative expenses, and we end up with net operating income of $200,000 and $230,000. Under absorption costings, $200,000 and $230,000. Under variable costing, it's $160,000 and $270,000. And the difference between them is the amount of fixed overhead that's carried forward in the inventory.